Welcome to Blind Trust, the show about money, power, and the deals that decide who wins before the game is even played. Every few years, the whole planet stops for one tournament. Right now, it is happening again. The World Cup is on, and for a few weeks, football feels like it belongs to everyone. So here is a question worth sitting with. What if the richest clubs in the world had already tried to take it away from you, quietly, permanently, with the backing of one of the most powerful banks on Wall Street? In April 2021, that is exactly what happened. 12 of the biggest clubs in Europe announced they were breaking away to form their own league. A league they could never be thrown out of. A closed shop, guaranteed for life, financed by a single American bank willing to put billions on the table, and then in about 48 hours it was dead. But here is the part almost nobody tells you. The league that everyone says was killed later walked into Europe's highest court and won. To understand why this was such a betrayal, you have to understand how European football actually works, because it is almost the opposite of American sports. In the United States, a league is a closed club. The 30 teams in the NBA are the league every year, forever. Nobody gets relegated. Nobody new forces their way in. Why do Americans accept that? Because in their model, the league is a business and the teams are its franchises. Stability is the point, but Europe never made that trade. Football grew up as something closer to a public institution, 100 years of clubs born in factories and churches and neighborhoods. European football is built on the opposite promise. Picture a giant pyramid. At the bottom, thousands of tiny clubs, village teams, factory teams. At the top, the famous giants, and the rule that connects them is simple and almost sacred: win, and you climb; lose, and you fall. Finish at the bottom of your league and you are relegated, drop down a level, and a smaller club takes your place. That single rule, promotion and relegation, is why a tiny club can dream. It is why the story of football is a story almost anyone can enter. Now hold that pyramid in your head, because the plan these 12 clubs were about to announce would quietly take a sledgehammer to its foundation. So why would the biggest clubs want to break the very thing that made them? The answer, as always, is money. By 2021, even the giants were drowning. The pandemic had emptied the stadiums. Some of these clubs carried debts in the hundreds of millions, and their analysis was cold. The most valuable thing in football wasn't the local league. It was the handful of glamour matches between the biggest names. The games hundreds of millions of people around the world actually pay to watch. The man who became the face of the plan was Florentino Perez, the president of Real Madrid. And in his telling, this was not greed at all. It was a rescue. Here is how he put it in his own words.
Porque nosotros lo que queremos es mejorar el fútbol, salvar el fútbol que está en un momento de riesgo, de verdad.
Whether you buy that or not, his logic was consistent. Football was losing the next generation, the money was drying up, and the only fix he could see was to put the biggest clubs in a room together every week and sell that to the world. And that one idea needed something specific. It needed a bank. Here is the mechanism, and it is the whole story, so stay with me. Say you are a bank, and someone offers you this deal. 15 of the most famous clubs on earth agree to form a league together. And unlike every other league, these 15 can never be relegated. They are permanent, founding members for life. Now, why does a banker care about that one word, permanent? Because permanent means predictable. A club that might get relegated is a risk. Its income could collapse next season. But a club that is guaranteed to be in the biggest competition every single year, forever, that is not really a football team anymore. That is an annuity, a near-guaranteed river of television money flowing in, decade after decade. And a guaranteed river of money is the easiest thing in the world for a bank to lend against. That is what JP Morgan saw. The bank agreed to put up an enormous launch facility, handed to the founding clubs up front, to be paid back slowly out of all that future, guaranteed income. The exact figure was reported differently across the financial press, anywhere from around €3.25 billion to nearly $5 billion. and look closely at the terms because they tell you how the bank really saw this. The money was to be repaid over roughly 23 years, at an interest rate of only about 2 to 3%. That is not how you price a gamble. That is how you price a near certainty. The low rate and the long horizon only make sense if you believe the income behind it can never collapse, because the clubs behind it can never be relegated. The clubs got cash now. The bank got decades of repayments from an income stream that, on paper, could never fall. Everybody in that room won. Everybody. That is, except the people who were never in the room. On the night of Sunday, the 18th of April 2021, it broke. 12 clubs, 6 from England, 3 from Spain, 3 from Italy, released a statement near midnight announcing the Super League.
Well, the big change is that you suddenly got 15, well, it's going to be 20 eventually, 20 teams playing each other the whole time, and they will control the pot of all the money that comes into those games, whether they are selling their own TV rights or from match day.
The structure was exactly what the bank had paid for. A 20-team competition built around 15 permanent founders who could never be relegated, plus a few guests invited each year. The biggest names in the sport, walled off at the top, playing each other forever. They had the clubs. They had the money. They had a launch statement and a logo. What they did not have, what it turned out they had never seriously checked, was whether anyone else would let them. The reaction was not what they expected. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an uprising. And it started, of all places, live on television, in the middle of a match broadcast, when a former player turned commentator put down the script and said what millions were feeling.
Manchester United, 100 years, born out of workers around here, and they're breaking away into a league without competition that they can't be relegated from. It's an absolute disgrace.
Within hours, that fury was everywhere. Fans who had spent their lives loyal to these clubs felt something simple. The club they thought was theirs had just told them the result no longer mattered, because the Giants could never lose their place. Supporters groups turned on their own teams, former captains, managers, pundits, all of them, against it. And then the protests left the television and arrived at the stadium gates. 2 days after the announcement, Chelsea had a home match. Before the team bus could even reach the stadium, thousands of fans surrounded it, blocking the road, refusing to let the game begin until the club walked away. Inside a few hours, it cracked. Chelsea moved to pull out. Then Manchester City, and by midnight, all 6 English clubs, half the entire breakaway, were gone. The British government had threatened to drop what one minister called a legislative bomb to stop it.
A Super League in the planning for years crumbled in less than 2 days as every corner of football united against it. And these were the moments the bricks started to fall from the wall.
It wasn't just fans. Players the clubs depended on said publicly they didn't want it. Managers distanced themselves on live television. One club, Leeds, warmed up in shirts printed with a protest against it. At Manchester United, the executive driving the plan announced he was stepping down within days. By the next day, the Italian and Spanish clubs were falling too. The Super League had launched on a Sunday night. By Tuesday, it was effectively over 48 hours. A project years in the making, backed by billions, undone by the one constituency nobody in that boardroom had bothered to ask. Which brings us back to the bank, because the most remarkable thing about that multi-billion facility is what happened to it. Nothing, not a dollar of it ever moved. The deal collapsed before the money was ever drawn down. But you cannot underwrite the most hated idea in the history of the sport and simply walk away clean. Within days, JP Morgan did something banks almost never do in public. It apologized.
JP Morgan became the latest partner of the European Super League to apologize today. A spokesperson saying, quote, "We clearly misjudged how this deal will be viewed by the wider football community and how it might impact them in the future. We will learn from this," end quote.
A sustainability ratings agency, Standard Ethics, then downgraded the bank over the affair, moving its rating from adequate to non-compliant. Think about the math of that. A bank that prices risk for a living had taken on one of the most powerful brands in sports, a near-guaranteed income stream, and still managed to lose. Not money, but something banks guard even more carefully: its reputation. The safest bet in football turned out to be the most expensive miscalculation. There is a human layer to this that makes it sting more. The man leading the fight against the breakaway was Alexander Ceferin, the president of UEFA, European football's governing body. And one of the architects of the Super League, the Juventus chairman Andrea Agnelli, was not a stranger to him. They were close. Ceferin was the godfather to Agnelli's daughter. Just days before the breakaway was announced, Agnelli had sat across from Ceferin and signed off on a completely different plan for the future of the game. And then he was gone. When Ceferin found out, he did not hold back.
I cannot stress more strongly at this moment, UEFA and the footballing world stand united against the disgraceful, self-serving proposal we have seen in the last 24 hours from a select...
He called them snakes and liars in public. This was not only a business dispute, it was, for the people inside it, a betrayal between men who had trusted each other, which is usually how the biggest deals and the biggest collapses actually happen. And here is where the story turns, long after everyone stopped watching, because the three clubs who refused to surrender, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus, didn't just sulk. They sued. Their argument was unexpected. That football's governing bodies, UEFA and FIFA, were themselves a kind of monopoly. That by threatening to ban any club or any player who joined a rival competition, they were abusing their power to protect their own. Strip away the legal language, and the claim is almost simple. Imagine the only company allowed to run a market is also the referee that decides whether a competitor is allowed to open at all and can punish anyone who dares to try. In most industries, regulators have a word for that. They call it abuse of a dominant position. And the clubs were asking a court to apply that word to the people who run football.
The EU's top court has ruled that banning clubs from joining a European Super League was unlawful. Now, the court has said that the football bodies were abusing their dominant position by forbidding clubs outright to compete in the Super League, but added that it didn't mean a breakaway league would be approved.
And in December 2023, Europe's highest court agreed with them. The Court of Justice of the European Union ruled that the way UEFA and FIFA had blocked the breakaway, with no clear, fair, transparent rules, broke European competition law. Now be careful here, because this is where headlines lie. The court did not order a Super League to exist. It did not say the breakaway was a good idea. What it said was narrower and sharper. The gatekeepers cannot be the gatekeepers and the rivals at the same time, deciding who is allowed to compete against them with no real limits. The league that the entire world had buried 2 years earlier had just been told, by the highest court on the continent, that it might have had a point. So what was it, really? On one reading, it was naked greed. A handful of billionaires trying to guarantee themselves a seat at the top forever, killed in 2 days by the fans they had taken for granted. On another, it was something more uncomfortable, because the problems the clubs pointed to, the debts, the bloated calendar, the money pouring out of the sport faster than it comes in, none of that went away. The breakaway died. The pressures that created it did not. A new version of the idea is still circulating, still looking for clubs brave enough or desperate enough to sign on, and the bank that financed the first attempt quietly went back to work in football, as if none of it had happened. The real question the Super League leaves you with isn't whether 12 clubs were greedy. It is a simpler one, when the people who own the game decide it belongs to them, and the people who love the game decide it belongs to everyone, who actually gets to win that argument. You watched what happened the first time. Next time, the lawyers are ready. The bank is still there. And the only thing standing in the gap is you.